so ago. Today, a state appeals court removed Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis from the Georgia election interference case against President-elect Donald Trump and others, but did not dismiss the indictment, leaving the future of the prosecution uncertain. We do want to bring in a friend of the show, trial attorney Jeremy Rosenthal, to help break this all down for us. Thanks for joining us here, as always, on Live Now. Happy to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Well, I've got a lot of questions for you, but I do want to start with this. Your initial reactions to this. Are you surprised?
A little bit. Look, I mean, what you had here was you had an appellate court, an intermediate court. You had the initial judge, what we call the trial judge, who basically said Fani Willis is okay. Donald Trump and his team went to the next level, who has now agreed with Mr. Trump. And now what we're going to see is it's going to go to the Georgia Supreme Court. Normally, what you would see here is what's called a harm analysis, because you've got a person on trial, Donald Trump, all of his co-defendants, and those people, their complaint says, look, we can't get a fair trial because of this. And Fani Willis having an inappropriate relationship with Nathan Wade, how does that impact or hurt Donald Trump's ability to defend himself? Well, they had to rely on, well, it's the integrity of the system. And that's a tough argument, and it's a bit of a stretch argument, and it worked here. And so I am a little surprised at the rationale and the reasoning. This case has been stuck in the mud for a long time, and it was foreseeable, like the other cases, that this would go away. The way it appears to be going away, and the rationale they used is a little bit surprising, also because that intermediate court of appeals, what they said was, look, normally we wouldn't dismiss a prosecutor, but this case is so important that we've got to dismiss this one because of the public integrity. So in other words, what they did is they sort of limited the damage, at least to this case. So the next defendant who comes up and tries to recuse a prosecutor isn't going to be so lucky.
Well, why didn't they throw out Trump's indictment entirely?
I don't think they have to. What's going to happen now is, in the case of a special prosecutor, what happens when you have one prosecutor that's recused, the case doesn't necessarily go away. But what you have to do is you have to find another prosecutor that's willing to take the case. And that's where this case is going to essentially die, because I don't know that Fani Willis is going to be able to find another district attorney or another person of a similar stature that's going to want to take the case. Remember that these are elected officials in the state of Georgia. The district attorney is, as they are in almost all places. So it's a political position. And you just had Donald Trump, who won the state of Georgia and won the election. And there's not going to be, I don't think, a lot of takers that are going to say, hey, sign me up for this nightmare. I just don't see that happening.
Okay, yeah, so that was my next question for you. You don't see it going any further here. Again, it's going to be up to the Prosecuting Attorneys Council of Georgia to find another prosecutor to take over this case. Say, though, that this doesn't die, so to speak. What are these next steps going to look like? What can we expect going forward, potentially? The other scenario of this, right?
I think Fani Willis and her team will take this up to the Georgia Supreme Court. The Georgia Supreme Court, though, they're all Republicans, and it puts them in a really, really, really uncomfortable spot, because now the Georgia Supreme Court has to essentially do one of two things. Either they're going to reinstate Fani Willis, which I think we can all see is politically very dangerous for them to do, or if they don't reinstate Fani Willis, they've got to sign off on this logic, which is, look, we don't want people recusing prosecutors just because a prosecutor made a mistake, right? And let's not forget that the trial judge originally told Fani Willis, I don't like this. I don't like you and Mr. Wade working together. It doesn't look right. Either you go or he goes. And he fell on the sword and resigned. So going forward, there was no longer a conflict. And so when you've got the appellate courts coming back and saying, okay, this doesn't harm Donald Trump's ability to defend himself, but this case is so special that for public integrity purposes, we still got to kick you off. now the Republican Supreme Court has to sign off on what is probably a little bit of some uncomfortable language for them. It's either that or put Fani Willis back on the case, and I don't see that happening. So that's the next step as it goes to the Republican Georgia Supreme Court. But I think they're going to do exactly what this intermediate court has done. So functionally, I think the case is dead. It's just sort of going to take a while to completely die.
And Jeremy, 2 federal criminal cases against Trump already have been given up, so to speak, here. But we're still looking at this New York hush money conviction from earlier this year. That's still uncertain. Do you think that, given all this happening with Fani Willis, that that's going to be given up as well?
No, that one, in fact, Judge Merchan just this week threw out Donald Trump's motion to dismiss based on the immunity ruling, and they've held pretty firm in New York State. And what you have in Fulton County is a bit of a different political dynamic. You've got a big city that is run that's a Democratic city. Fani Willis is a Democrat. She was just reelected, but then above her, you've got a really a conservative infrastructure above her. You don't have that in New York State. In New York State, you've got Alvin Bragg in the Manhattan DA's office, and the courts that are above him that are going to rule on this case are almost certainly not going to be as sympathetic to Mr. Trump as they are in Georgia or to his arguments. What Judge Merchan said was, and to kind of reset that a little bit, to go back to the hush money case in New York State. Remember that what happened here was that the case was tried. One of the main witnesses in the case was Hope Hicks, and she testified a lot about things that happened in the Oval Office. She testified a lot about what Donald Trump did and said after he was inaugurated as president. Several months later, the U.S. Supreme Court, in their immunity ruling, came back and said what the president does and says while he's the president is off limits. And they set those ground rules for what are official acts, right? Pardoning somebody or directing the Justice Department, to things that are presumptively official, all the way to things that we know are unofficial. What Judge Merchan came back and said is what Hope Hicks, going back to that, what she talked about falls under unofficial acts, so I'm not going to throw the case out based on what she said. So he is sort of held firm, to answer your question. But yes, the Georgia cases, those appear sort of dead as a doornail.
Yeah, a lot going on here, and obviously all of this so unprecedented, right? Jeremy, thank you for coming on to break this down. Is there anything else that you would like to add before I let you go that you think I didn't mention or touch on?
No, you've let me nerd out pretty hardcore this morning, so thank you. Look, Donald Trump's winning streak continues. It's foreseeable that this thing is stuck in the mud in those intermediate courts in Georgia, and I don't think it's a question of if this case dies, it's when it dies. And this was certainly a very big blow to Miss Willis today. And I think again, Donald Trump's winning streak with the courts continues here. Winning a national election will do that for you. So very interesting topic, and we're obviously going to have to stay tuned.
Yeah, and real quick follow-up there. When do you think, though, if, it's not the question of is it going to, when will it, when can we expect that?
Sometime between 2025 and 2027. I don't know how fast the Georgia Supreme Court is. If it's like any other Supreme Court of any other state that I know, my guess is that it's going to take a while. And my guess is that their reasoning is going to be very similar to the intermediate courts. I think they're going to sign off on that. And then what's going to happen is they're not going to find another prosecutor to take this case. It's going to go away. And look, if Fani Willis is replaced and there's another district attorney in Fulton County, then it could be game on. But then you've got all sorts of speedy trial problems. I mean, the case is just done. Right. So, yeah, that's the short answer.
All right, Jeremy, we always appreciate you coming on here to break this down. Thanks so much.
Have a good morning.
You too.